Hi everybody, I'm Jason Fenichel. Today we're going to talk about the Afro-Cuban groove, the Songo, which is one of the only Latin grooves that's actually derived from the drum set. It's also one of the only Latin grooves that's based off a linear style. Linear meaning nothing really lines up, everything's in its own spot. So what I like to do is break down the basic version of this groove and teach you guys how to do it. Now if you're not familiar with the Afro-Cuban style of drumming, Afro-Cuban of course is a combination of African and Cuban rhythms mashed together over the years to form its own style of drumming. Now Afro-Cuban drumming is based off one rhythm and we call that the clave. The clave, which could be played 4 different ways, either the rumba clave in 3-2 or 2-3, or the son clave 3-2 or 2-3. So we have all these different arrangements of those claves. And we'll talk about that in a different lesson. I don't want to go too crazy with it. But basically all the Cuban rhythms fit against the Afro-Cuban clave rhythm. Now essentially there's a couple of ways of thinking about this and breaking this down. But I'm going to do it through notation, and then we're going to talk about a simpler way of developing it. First we're going to start with the actual notation of the groove. Now if you notice, you could break down this rhythm in a couple of different ways, starting from your hands and then mixing in your feet. I'm also going to water this down a little bit and make it more the Western way that we learn, a little different from what I was playing in the beginning, which is more the traditional way of playing this particular beat. So we're going to start with what the right hand is doing. Now the right hand is going to play on the 1 and the 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. That's going to be your ride hand. Now you could ride on any surface. It doesn't mean that you have to use the hi-hat, the cowbell, the ride cymbal, the rim of the drum, anything you want to use, you could keep that ride pattern going, but that's going to kind of dictate where the beat is. Now something you also have to be aware of in the Afro-Cuban style, the downbeat is not on beat 1 as it traditionally is in most other styles. Basically every other style, that downbeat is the strongest beat. It's the most important beat to hear. In Afro-Cuban music, the downbeat is on the end of 2. We also generally read Afro-Cuban rhythms in cut time. So when I say the end of 2, it's going to be a faster feeling. You can also look at it like the of 1, 1 e and or 1 and 2 end. And we're going to think of it more like that, 1 and 2 end. And that's going to give you that downbeat. So if we just practice feeling that, 1 and 2 end, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and let's do a little slower, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that's going to be where the band is really feeling that pulse. And you want to make sure you nail that end of 2, because that's what really gives it that Cuban vibe. So I just want to practice the right hand on the 1 and 3 and the bass drum on the end of 2. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 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 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Now we're going to start adding in the left hand part. And here's where the linear gets a little fishy when we start playing this. Basically the left hand is going to fill in a lot of the gaps that are being left by that foundation. So if this is your skeleton, the left hand is going to fill in a bunch of extra spaces. So the first one's 1, 2, end. 1, 2, end. So notice we have the beat 2, 1, 2, end, coming right before that downbeat on the bass drum. 1, 2, end. So now I want you to try to add that one note at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little slower. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 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 Now let's talk about filling in the rest of the measure. Basically what I want to do is wrap a bass drum in between 2 snare drums. Now what do I mean by that? We're going to put an extra bass drum on beat 4. Now that's not going to interfere with the end of 2. It's going to be in addition to the end of 2. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now it's a very common rhythm to use because a bass player plays something called a tumbao. And a tumbao plays bass notes on that rhythm, the end of 2 and beat 4. But of course remember the end of 2 is always your strong downbeat. What I want you to do is put a bass drum, or it's 2 snare drums in between each of those bass drums. So I want you to do N4 end. Let's try that again. N4 end. One more time. N4 end. So we have snare, bass, snare. Now, basically that's going to fit N4 end. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 end. Now there's your whole rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 end. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There lies the crux of your songo. So if you can just get that much down, you're in good shape. Let's loop that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now something I like to practice with my students is actually just getting that second half, starting on beat 3 and looping back to beat 1. So basically, it's going to be like a palindrome. Now anyone that knows what a palindrome is, it's when you say a phrase the same way forward as you do backwards. So think of it like this. Hi-hat, snare drum, bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat. Can we see how that's a palindrome? Starts with a hi-hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. I want you to try to find that. Now the tendency is going to go, I don't want you to do that. Right, left, bass, right, left. That's the wrong way, and that's what you're going to feel like you want to do. I want you to resist that and keep it ride, snare, bass, snare, ride. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Let's just practice doing that. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Make that feel good. Might take a little bit. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. So now if we think of it that way, what we're going to do is we're going to add the beginning to it. The beginning is 1, 2, end. 1, 2, end. 1, 2, end. Now let's add our hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. 1, 2, end. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Again. 1, 2, end. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Again. Hat, snare, bass. 1, 2, end. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. 1, 2, end. Hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Once you have that, you pretty much have the groove down. The only thing left to do is in the second measure. Essentially, both measures are identical. There's only one difference between your two measures. The first measure you're holding on the end of beat 1. 1 and 2 and. 1 and 2 and. The second measure you're going to play inside of that hold. So you're going to get 1 and 2 and. And that's the only difference. So basically you could practice alternating. 1, 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. Then the second measure is 1 and 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. So now you have your two measures almost identical, except one has an extra snare drum. 1 and 2 and, snare, bass, snare, 1 and 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, hat, 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, hat, and 2 and, bass, snare, hat, 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, and 2 and, hat, snare, bass, snare, hat. And you want to practice that over and over again until that feeling becomes comfortable. And that's going to give you the foundation of your songo. Of course, that's not where we leave it. The next step is we have to add accents.